Sup guys, I'm Kel, Red Zone MTG, and welcome to another Oathbreaker deck video. Today we are covering Gideon, ally of Zendikar, and his signature spell, Collective Effort. Now this deck is actually one of the more fair decks that I've covered on my channel so far, and it is also a token deck, as you can see. We are going to be running a lot of tokens. Gideon himself is a really solid planeswalker. He starts with 4 loyalty, 2 of any double white. He has a +1 of he turns into a 5/5 human soldier ally until end of turn with indestructible, and then all damage is prevented. He also has a 0 of you create a 2/2 white knight ally creature token, and then he also has a -4 of you get an emblem with creatures you control gain +1/+1. That is awesome, by the way. That is really cool because you can do that emblem immediately because he starts with 4 starting loyalty, and if you have a card like, I don't know, Forge of Heroes, which lets you put an additional loyalty counter on Gideon, that means you can ultimate him, get that emblem, and still have him live the turn you play him, which is really good. And like I said, we are running like a token strategy, so getting that free anthem that, you know, sticks around and never goes away is really good, and you can do it more than once, which is very sweet. So let's start talking about his signature spell. So the signature spell I chose for this deck is Collective Effort. It is a sorcery for 1 of any and double white. It has Escalate of tap an untapped creature you control, which is actually pretty easy for our deck because, like I said, we are running a token deck. It's kind of more like a token and taxes style deck, but you know, Gideon himself makes a token. So you could play Gideon, create a token, and then immediately be able to do the Escalate effect on here. And the abilities are, you get to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater, so pretty good, blow up a big dude. Destroy target enchantment, also pretty good. Or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. So you could, you know, do the 0 here, create a 2/2, and then you can play Collective Effort, and then, I don't know, blow up a dude and put a +1/+1 counter on all of your guys. That's pretty good. I really like that Collective Effort is like a toolbox spell. You know, it doubles as removal and pumping your team, blowing up really big threats or pesky enchantments, or just, you know, pumping your dudes for the win. I really like it a lot, and I think it really synergizes well with Gideon, ally of Zendikar. And speaking of Gideon, let's start talking about more Gideons with Gideon of the Trials. He is a 3-drop Gideon with 3 starting loyalty, 1 of any double white. His +1 is, it says, until your next turn, prevent all damage that target permanent would deal, which is pretty sweet. It's permanent, so you can hit, you know, your opponent's planeswalkers or creatures or whatever. Then his 0 is his, you know, Gideon ability where he turns into a 4/4 human soldier with indestructible. He's still a planeswalker, prevent all damage. You know, it's the Gideon ability. And then he has another 0 of you get an emblem with as long as you control a Gideon planeswalker, you can't lose the game and your opponent can't win the game, which is pretty cool because, you know, our Oathbreaker is Gideon. It's just a nice way of ensuring that we don't lose unless our opponent removes our Oathbreaker or one of the other Gideons we have. And speaking of other Gideons, we got Gideon Blackblade. This is a really sweet one from War of the Spark. He's a 4 loyalty Gideon with 1 of any and 2 white. I'm saying the word Gideon a lot, and it's becoming painfully aware. As long as it's your turn, he is a 4/4 human soldier with indestructible, still a planeswalker, and then you prevent all damage that would be dealt to him. So basically, on your turn, he's always a dude, which is really sweet. Doesn't kind of like waste an ability. And then he has a +1 of up to 1 other target creature you control gains your choice of Vigilance, Lifelink, or Indestructible until end of turn. Really sweet in protecting some of our other dudes or just getting some Lifelink when we need life. And then he has a -6 of Exile target non-land permanent. So really solid. Basically, like at the base level, he's a 4/4 for 3 with Indestructible and prevent all damage that we dealt to him. And then he also like pumps our team a little bit, like gives them some abilities and some versatility. It's a really good card. And also, I actually really like the art on this one. I think it's really cool. Next up, I want to talk about a quick little equipment package that we run with Stoneforge Mystic. You probably already know what this card does, but I'll cover it really quick. It's a 2-drop, 1/2, 1 of any, and a white. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an equipment, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your library. And then you can pay 1 of any, a white, and tap it, and put an equipment from your hand onto the battlefield. Pretty good. What equipment are we running? Well, we're basically running the 2 best equipment in the game, barring the Sword of Blank and Blank. We are running Umezawa's Jite, fantastic equipment, really good with creature-based strategies, really good against creature-based strategies. It's a 2-drop. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to anything, you put 2 charge counters on Umezawa's Jite, and you can remove the counters and, you know, give the creature +2/+2. You can give another creature -1/-1, and you can just gain 2 life. Really, really good. Makes combat math a terrible pain in the butt. You can still gain life if you need it, and it just got a casual equip of 2. Really, really solid card. And then also we run Batterskull because it's a big old beast, and dropping an early Batterskull is kind of a big game, especially in Oathbreaker when people only have 20 life. And if you didn't know what it does, I guess I'll cover it really quickly. It's a 5-drop living weapon, which means it comes into play attached to a 0/0 black germ. It itself gives the equipped creature +4/+4 vigilance and lifelink. So basically it kind of comes into play as a 4/4 with vigilance and lifelink. And you can pay 3 and return it to your hand, and it has an equip of 5. So it's kind of a classic combo, Stoneforge into Batterskull. Pretty good. Now let's start talking about some of the creatures in the deck. We got a big stack of creatures here. These are creatures that do not make tokens, and we are running some that also make tokens. These ones have some versatility or just really efficient or what have you, so let's start talking about them. First up, we have Recruiter of the Guard, 3-drop 1/1, but when it enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for a creature with toughness 2 or less, reveal it, and then put it into our hand. So keep that in mind as we're talking about other creatures. Anything with 2 or less toughness is game to search up with Recruiter of the Guard, you know, like the Stoneforge Mystic that we already talked about. Next up, we have Knight of the White Orchid. It is one of the ramp dudes that we have in the deck, double white, 2/2 with first strike. It says when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for a plains and put it into play. Pretty good. Next up, we have Oreskos Explorer, very similar to the last card. 2-drop 2/2. When it's the battlefield, search your library for up to X planes, where X is the number of players who control more lands than you. Then you put them in your hand. So it doesn't come into play like the Knight of the White Orchid, but we still get some planes, which is pretty sweet. Next up, we have Mentor of the Meek, 2/2 for 3. Whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under our control, we can pay 1, and if we do, draw a card. Really, really good draw engine for our deck. You know, our Oathbreaker makes 2/2s. Lets us draw cards with this ability, and we have a lot of low power dudes in the deck. Like I said, token deck, we're going to be swarming the field, and pretty solid. Next up, I have Banasur Priest. I run this over Containment Priest because it only has 2 toughness, and we can search it up with Recruiter of the Guard. She is a 3-drop, double white, 1 of any, and when it enters the battlefield, we can exile a creature an opponent controls until Banasur Priest leaves the battlefield. So pretty good. Just kind of removes a dude until they can kill her. You know, just a really, really solid card. Similarly, Palace Jailer, also really good. He's a 4-drop, so 2 of any, 2 white. He's a 2/2, so he can be searched up with Recruiter. When he enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, which is awesome. And then he also says when he enters the battlefield, you can exile a creature target opponent controls until an opponent becomes the Monarch. So pretty similar to the Banasur Priest, except we get to become the Monarch, and which lets us draw cards and kind of adds the Monarch into the game, which I think is a really cool mechanic. So this is a windmill slam in my opinion. Next up, we have Gideon, Hero of Akros. This is our last Gideon in the deck. He is a 2/1 human soldier for 1 white. You can pay 2 of any and a white to give him indestructible. And at the end of combat, if he and at least 2 other creatures attacked, then you transform him. And he turns into Gideon, Battleforged, who is a 3 loyalty Gideon. With his +2, you can force a creature an opponent controls to attack Gideon during their next turn. He has a +1 of until your next turn, target creature gains indestructible. Untap that creature. Pretty solid, and then he has the Gideon ability of turning into a 4/4 human soldier with indestructible that prevents all damage you'll be dealt to him. You know, pretty solid for just a 1-drop. Yeah, pretty good. Next up, we have Anafenza Kintree Spirit. I really like the art in this card. I think it's really cool. It is a double white for a 2/2. Legendary creature, Spirit Soldier. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, bolster 1. So it doesn't kind of proc off of our tokens, which is fine. We're still running a lot of regular creatures in the deck, and then we get a bolster whenever a dude enters the battlefield under our control. So that bolster can pump up the tokens, which is pretty sweet. Next up, I run a card that you might have seen me open in my Battle Bond unboxing video. This is Breitling. It is a 3/3 for 1 of any, double white, and it has a bunch of abilities. For 1 white, it gains vigilance until end of turn. For 1 white, it gains lifelink until end of turn. For a white, you can return it to your hand, which is pretty sweet. And for 1 of any, it can get +1, -1, or -1, +1 until end of turn. Super versatile, just a really efficient creature, and you know, I love the art. Really cool card. Next, we have Sublime Ark Angel. I think this card is fantastic for the deck. It costs 4 mana, 2 of any, double white, 4/3 flying with Exalted, which means whenever creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And then other creatures you control have Exalted. And then it says, if a creature has multiple instances of Exalted, each triggers separately. So basically, it makes it so you can attack with 1 dude, and it gets pumped up for all of the tokens and stuff you have on the field, which is really, really good, because we kind of want to have a lot of dudes on the field. Next, I have Auric Champion. This is kind of like a metagame call in my opinion. It has protection from black and red. It is a 1/1 for 2 white, and it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under anyone's control, you may gain 1 life. This is pretty good. If you are running against a lot of aggressive decks, a lot of mono red decks or mono black decks, or decks with a lot of removal in black and red, it's a really good card. And you know what? I do run against a lot of that kind of stuff, so Auric Champion I think is actually pretty good. And we're going to be playing a lot of dudes, so that gaining life ability will be pretty relevant. Next we have the classic Mother of Runes. 1/1 Cleric for 1 white. Tap it. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Fantastic card. It's just kind of, you know, one of the best white 1-drops ever printed. Protects your whole board. I mean, there's not much else to say. It's a windmill slam in my opinion in white. Next up we have Selfless Spirit. 2/1 flying for 1 of any and a white. Pretty good rate right there. And you can sack it and give all your creatures indestructible until end of turn, which is really, really good for protecting your board against wrath effects and removal. Once again, I think this is a windmill slam in mono white, especially if you're running a token or go wide strategy. We also run Imposing Sovereign, also a 2-drop, 1 of any 1 white, 2/1, and it says creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So it just kind of like slows down all of our opponents, makes their haste completely useless, and also makes all the dudes enter the battlefield tapped so we can just attack right over them. They can't just play a blocker and then immediately block with it. They have to wait until untap with it. So, you know, pretty good, and just for 2 mana, pretty efficient rate. Next we have Containment Priest, 2/2 flash for 1 of any and a white. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. So you hose over all of your opponent's Reanimator or cheaty effects. I mean, Containment Priest, once again, windmill slam in a deck like this. We're playing tokens and we're taxing them a little bit. Next up I have this Korean Salia, Guardian of Thraben. She is a 2/1 first strike for 1 of any and a white. And she says non-creature spells cost 1 additional mana to play. For everyone, so it kind of hurts us a little bit for some of our non-creature spells, but you know what, we're running a lot of creature spells as well, so still really, really good. And I mean, Thalia is one of my favorite cards of all time with one of the coolest arts in my opinion. And then we're running the other Thalia by another fantastic artist. She's a 3/2 first strike for 2 of any and a white, and it says creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tap. So kind of like the Imposing Sovereign, but it also hosts over non-basic lands, which is also really, really good. Thalia and the Imposing Sovereign can be pretty oppressive. Alright, now we're finally to our token generators, kicking it off with Brimaz, King of Oreskos. He's a 3/4, big ol' kitty for 1 of any and 2 white. He has Vigilance. Whenever he attacks, you put a 1/1 white soldier cat token into play, who has Vigilance and who is also attacking. And when he blocks, you do the same thing, but it is also blocking. Brimaz is actually a really, really efficiently costed card, and he, you know, pumps out little cat dudes. Next we have Monastery Mentor, who is a 2/2 for 2 of any and a white with Prowess, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get a 1/1 monk with Prowess. And we do have a non-zero amount of non-creature spells, so we'll end up generating a couple monks at the very least. Next we have Alive Aketra with Aketra the True. 3 of any and a white. She's a 3/6 with double strike and indestructible. She can't attack or block unless you control at least 3 other creatures, which, you know, hopefully we're controlling 3 other creatures. And she can pay 3 of any and a white to create a 1/1 white warrior with Vigilance. Next up we have the Zombie Aketra with God Eternal Aketra. 3 of any, double white, 3/6 with double strike. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior token with Vigilance, and then she says when she dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put her into the library, 3rd from the top. And I just want to note some really cool flavor stuff here. So the Alive Aketra makes 1/1 white warriors with Vigilance, while the Eternalized Aketra makes the same warrior, except they've become an Eternal. It's a 4/4 with Vigilance. I think it's actually really, really cool. Next up we have the final Planeswalker of the deck with Elspeth, Knight Errant. She is a 4-drop, 2 of any double white. She has 4 starting loyalty. She has a +1 of, you get to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. She has another +1 of, you get to give another creature, +3/+3, and flying until end of turn, which is pretty cool. And she has a -8 of, you get an emblem with all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and lands you control have indestructible. That's pretty good. Next we have Secure the Wastes. For X and a white, you get to put X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. Just a really efficient token generator. Next we have another War of the Spark card with Finale of Glory. For X and double white, you get to create X 2/2 white soldier creature tokens with Vigilance. And then if X is 10 or more, you also create X white 4/4 angel creature tokens with flying and Vigilance. Yeah, pretty solid. We're basically not going to really get to that X equals 10 there, but, you know, it could happen. Now we have the only board wipe in the deck. We are pretty board wipe light, but, you know, we want to make the board, and we don't really want to wipe our own board, but we have Martial Coup here for X double white. Put X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. If X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. Pretty solid. Make a bunch of dudes and then kill all of the other dudes. I also run Oketra's Monument. For 3 of any, it's a legendary artifact. White creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and we are running a good number of white creature spells. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior with vigilance. Yeah, I mean, no brainer in this deck, honestly. I also run Divine Visitation for 3 of any, double white. If 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, that many 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance are created instead. So, you know, whenever we make a dude with Gideon, we get an angel. Whenever we make a bunch of dudes with Secure the Wastes, we get a bunch of angels. And then finally for the token generators, I run Legion's Landing. It is a 1-drop legendary enchantment. If you play Standard, you probably know all about this card. When it enters the battlefield, you get to make a 1/1 white vampire with lifelink. And then if you attack with 3 or more creatures, you transform it. And it turns into Adanto, the first fort legendary land. You can tap it to add a white, and you can pay 2 of any and a white and tap it to create a 1/1 white vampire with lifelink. And since we're running so many token makers, Anointed Procession is a windmill slam, 3 of any and a white enchantment. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates double that many tokens. So yeah, Gideon makes 2 guys, and then everything else also makes double. I mean, fantastic card. And who doesn't like doubling all the stuff they get? I also run Unbreakable Formation, really good way to protect our board. For 2 of any and a white, instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and if you cast a spell during your main phase, you get to put a 1/1 counter on all of your dudes, and they also gain vigilance. Yeah, super good. Pretty good, like, anti-board wipe effect, but also you can pump all your guys. Yeah. I also run Throne of the God Pharaoh. It is a legendary artifact for 2 of any. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. So we can swing in big on one opponent, and then everyone else loses life equal to the number of tapped dudes we control, including the person we attacked as well. So this is a slam dunk in any aggro strategy that goes wide. And now I have a couple quick removal spells. Swords to Plowshares. It's Swords to Plowshares. I don't really need to go over this too much. You should run it in all your white decks. And then I also run Council's Judgment. I think this card is amazing in 1v1, and it's really fun in multiplayer. Sorcery for 1 of any, double white. Will of the Council. Starting with you, each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control. Exile each permanent with the most votes, or tied for the most. So typically you'll just get one thing, because you'll vote for something and then everyone will vote for the same thing. Or you can get someone who's like, let's vote for multiple things and get like 3 things, which is pretty good. And finally, let's quickly go over the lands. We're running Karakas because it is not banned in Oathbreaker, so if you have one, you're running mono white, you should probably run Karakas. Really, really solid. Next up, I run Memorial to Glory. Enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for a white. You can pay 3 of any and a white and tap it and sack it to create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. I'm also running Cradle of the Accursed. Taps for a colorless. You can pay 3 of any and tap it and sack it to make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Actually kind of good. And then of course I run Mishra's Factory. Pretty classic card. Tap it for a colorless. You can pay 1 and turn it into a 2/2 assembly worker artifact creature, and then you can tap it and give an assembly worker +1/+1. You know, it's just a land that becomes a dude, which is really sweet. We have Sheffit Dunes. You can tap it and add a colorless. Tap it and pay 1 life and add a white, and you can tap it, pay 2 of any, double white, sack a desert. It itself is a desert, and also we run another desert too. The Cradle of the Curse is a desert. And then creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. You can only activate this anytime you can cast a sorcery, but still kind of like a, you know, pump effect if you really need a pump effect, and it's on a land, which is pretty sweet. I also run Emergence Zone from War of the Spark. Tap it and add a colorless. Pay 1 of any and tap it and sack it, and you can cast spells this turn as though they had flash, which is pretty sweet. Lets you keep up your mana, see what your opponent's going to do, and then maybe dump a whole bunch of tokens at the end of their turn and then swing for a big win, which is, you know, pretty solid. And of course, I run Forge of Heroes. I talked about this at the beginning of the video. Amazing card for Gideon, amazing card for Oathbreaker. If you're playing Oathbreaker, you should get some of these. They're still pretty cheap, like 50 cents. You should probably buy a couple of them at least if you plan on making some Oathbreaker decks. It's a land, taps for a colorless. You can tap it and put a loyalty counter on your Oathbreaker if it came into the battlefield this turn. Super solid card, staple of the format. And then finally I run 13 Plains. And that's that, guys. If you liked the video, then leave a like, comment, subscribe. It all really helps. Have a fantastic day, everyone, and I will see you next time.